Welcome back to App Stories. Today's show is brought to you by ZocDoc. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing really well. You know, we had a really good chat in the pre-show today all about Threads, the new social network from Meta. And if people are interested in hearing a little more about how we're using it, what we think about the app, what we think about the service, some more broader topics about ActivityPub and things like that, you can get that pre-show by subscribing to App Stories Plus. Just go to appstories.plus, or even better, become a Club Mac Stories Premier member, because Club Mac Stories Premier gets you all the stuff that the club gets you. That's our newsletters, special columns, all sorts of stuff that we're doing over there. Our Discord community as well, plus App Stories Plus. So that Premier membership is really everything we offer. So check that out and all the details there by going to plus.club. All right, Federico, let's dig into the web apps that we use. Because you know what made me think of this?
Yes, you came up with this idea. So what did you think of this?
Well, I was thinking about it because I've been playing around with macOS Sonoma, and one of the new features of Sonoma is the ability to create these single-purpose web apps. So this is, there are a lot of apps that do this sort of thing. Unite is one of them. I think that they've sponsored Mac Stories in the past, and there are other services that do this as well. Fluid is another one that comes to mind right away. But I really like what Sonoma and Safari are doing here, because it's about as simple as it possibly could be. You just navigate to a website that you want to turn into its own app. You go up to the file menu, you select Add to Dock, and it shows up in your dock.
Oh, it's like shortcuts.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say. It's exactly like Shortcuts. Shortcuts kind of pioneered this and tested the waters, and the Safari team picked it up. And you can change the name of your web app. You can change the icon if it doesn't pick up the favicon or whatever image it's using for that. But usually all you have to do is pick Add to Dock and hit OK, and you're ready to go. And it goes down in your dock, and you don't have to leave it in your dock. You can take it out of there and it'll still exist as a separate web app. And, one of the advantages of that, I guess, is one, when you have a web app, it doesn't get lost in your tabs. That's one advantage that I like. Another is that you can launch it with an app like Raycast, or even Shortcuts using the Open App action. So there advantages to that kind of thing. And I've actually found that certain web services run better as a web app than they do in a Safari tab. And
interesting. Really?
Yeah, I have noticed. Now, look, I've only done this for a couple of weeks now, or a few weeks, but MailChimp, which historically has been just an enormous resource hog in Safari, seems to behave a lot better in its own web app. So I've been doing that, and we'll talk about all the apps that we're using as web apps. But I don't mean to limit this to things we've turned into web apps using Sonoma, since I know you're not on Sonoma yet. But I wanted to talk more broadly about these web services and web apps that we're using, because I think with this new feature coming, it's something that's worth thinking about and deciding whether what belongs in a web app versus using it in a tab versus using a dedicated app if the service offers one, and that kind of thing.
So, but let me ask you though, is this Sonoma feature like different from adding a web app to the home screen on the iPhone and iPad? Like, or is it like the same feature but it adds it to your dock? Like, does it do anything particularly different from what we've been able to do for years really on the iPhone? Like when you go to a web page or a website and you just add it to the home screen, and so now you have a web app pinned to the home screen. Like, is that different, or is just new on macOS?
It's more new on macOS. I mean, it's not, you get basically a bare bones version of Safari that doesn't have things like tabs or your extensions or an address bar or any of those kind of things.
Yeah. All right. So it's basically what Google Chrome has been able to do for a while. Like
This is not revolutionary. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that it's revolutionary at all. but it is still a nice thing to have. And basically, the only UI you get, like I just opened up my one that I made for Matter, and you've got the option of including back and forward buttons. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a little Safari icon. So if you want to kick out to full-on Safari, you can do that too. But that's really the only Chrome, other than the window itself, that you've got for these web apps.
Nice. All right. So let's talk about some of these web apps that we use. I guess we can go in any order we want. I'll mention one that maybe it's going to surprise you. I use Dropbox on the web. I don't have Dropbox installed on my Mac.
I knew this about you already. And Dropbox is a whole nother story. I kind of would like to get rid of Dropbox personally, and I've been thinking about it because it's worse now that it's changed into a file provider on Mac OS. And if I do that, I would probably follow your lead and using it in a web browser, because I expect, despite the fact that I would like to get rid of Dropbox, there's always going to be a certain need from Dropbox in terms of working with other people and features that just aren't available in iCloud Drive.
Yeah, so the reason why I don't keep it on my Mac is exactly that sort of flakiness that we've seen since it switched to being a file provider. And also it comes down to the way that I work. If you asked me a decade ago, like, having Dropbox installed was a must, because a lot of the apps that I used, like that kept documents in the cloud, were actually keeping those documents in Dropbox. But that's not the case anymore. Whether I'm using Apple Notes or Reminders or Obsidian, like, they either use iCloud or they have their own syncing system. And I just don't work with files. Like, I don't need constant access to a specific folder of files anymore. For me, a cloud service, like at this point, I would consider my primary cloud service iCloud Drive. Like, when I need to save a document for later, I just put it in iCloud Drive. I use Dropbox essentially because of shared folders that I have with you, with Mike and Steven, for uploading podcast files. And so when I'm done recording, I have 2 bookmarks in Safari, and I just go to the Dropbox web app and I upload 2 files from Finder. And that's all that I do.
Yeah, because my sense is you and I have a bigger shared folder than that, with more Mac Stories information in it than just the stuff that we do with the podcasts. But my sense is that you rarely, if ever, look at that. Am I right about that?
Yeah, but also when I look at it, is it any different, opening Finder and going to Dropbox, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, or just going to Dropbox.com and opening the folder on the web and looking at stuff on the web, and if I need it, I can download it. But otherwise, there's previews for everything. And there's actually even more filtering tools than you get in Finder with the Dropbox integration. So I actually quite like using the web version because it's got previews, it's got comments, it shows you all kinds of metadata that you don't get in Finder. But like, for example, right now I'm looking at the template for an ebook that we do for my iOS reviews. Like, I can preview this on the web. I can actually leave a comment for you if I want. I can zoom in, zoom out, crop it, make it full screen. I can print it. Why would I need this in Finder if I can just do everything I want on the Dropbox website without cluttering my file system?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think it makes me want to try doing it too, mainly because I feel like my continued use of Dropbox in the Finder is more from inertia than it is anything else. And I think that there's a lot of things like that in our tech lives that you don't always recognize, and you just kind of keep doing it in the same way. Another one that comes to mind for me immediately is 1Password. And is that really an app that's necessary anymore, given what Apple's done? I think for some people, maybe. For me, probably not. And it's really just a matter of taking the time and making sure that everything that I keep in 1Password already is in Apple's thing, with Apple's password manager, which I think is probably true, but I would still have to go through and maybe, make sure I was sure about that. And then also set up new shared password collections with both my family and with you and Alex and Sylvia. So, there's some work to be done there that I haven't really had the time to do. But I'm thinking about it. And what makes something like that one harder too is I have to, kind of drag along. I got to convince you and Alex and Sylvia to do that too. I mean, I think you guys wouldn't be that hard to convince, but maybe my family would be. I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see. But I think Dropbox kind of falls into that category of it was way ahead of its time. And now iCloud Drive probably has caught up far enough for a lot of people. And then if you do need some of those special features from Dropbox, you can just use the web version instead.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by ZocDoc. Have you ever been on the hunt for a new doctor and you ask everyone you know for a recommendation? I mean, it makes sense. You want a doctor who actually gets you, who listens to you, and who makes you feel super comfortable. Finally, after weeks of searching, you finally find one. They meet all of your requirements and then some. So you call their office and they have an appointment available. Then you find out your perfect doctor doesn't take your insurance. Don't worry. Head on over to ZocDoc to find and book the doctor who is right for you and takes your insurance. ZocDoc is a free app where you can find amazing doctors and book appointments online. We're talking about booking appointments with thousands of top-rated, patient-reviewed doctors and specialists. And you can filter specifically for ones who take your insurance, are located nearby, and treat almost any condition you're searching for. These doctors all have verified reviews from actual real patients, not bots. The average wait time to see a doctor booked on ZocDoc is between just 24 and 48 hours. That's it. You can even get same-day appointments. Once you find the doctor you want, you can book them immediately in just a few taps. So no more waiting awkwardly on hold for a receptionist. It's really hard to find all the things that you need in a doctor, both someone who has availability, somebody who's nearby, and someone who takes your insurance. That's a constant struggle in trying to find a doctor that you need, or a specialist for that matter. And as I've said before, I moved about a year ago to North Carolina, and one of the first things we had to do was find a whole new set of doctors for everybody in our family. And ZocDoc was one of the first things that I used to do that because they had just recently become a sponsor of the podcast. And so I tapped around through the app and found a bunch of doctors. It was a lot faster than the back and forth recommendation process where you have a friend or a family member who says someone's good, but then it turns out they can't see you or they don't take your insurance or whatever it happens to be. So if you're looking for a doctor, go on over to ZocDoc.com/appstories and download the ZocDoc app for free right now. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/appstories so they know you came from the show. ZocDoc.com/appstories. Our thanks to ZocDoc for their support of the show.
You mentioned Matter. So tell me, how do you use the Matter web app?
So, Matter can be run as an app on the Mac.
And this is days. Matter, the read later client, not Matter, the home standard, obviously.
That's correct. It's the read later app. And I use it primarily on my iPhone and iPads, but I do a lot of saving of articles on the Mac. And sometimes, like when we're getting ready to put out the newsletter for Club Mac Stories, sometimes I'll have stuff in there that I know I want to grab a link from and put in the newsletter, so I'll open it there. And I don't really like the Mac app very well. I think it's one of the ones that got you to use. It's an iPad app, and it got you to use that GitHub project that changed the the resolution of iPad apps so that they look bigger and not as strange on the Mac. And I think their web app is actually quite good. I just don't like, I had it pinned on the left side of Safari, but I kind of like having it as a separate thing so that when I open it, all I'm seeing is my list of articles that I have. I don't have the distraction of the other stuff I might be working on. So it's just kind of a decision based on focused reading more than anything else. And so I've got Matter in that.
Nice. I use GitHub on the web also.
Really?
Yeah. So I find the UI of the main repo page. So we use GitHub and Mac Stories to keep track of each other's drafts. and we have a standalone repo for the club. And each week we put our separate drafts in there, and then John assembles everything in Calliope and MailChimp, which I'm guessing John would like to cover next.
Yeah.
But so I like using GitHub on the web because when you click on a Markdown file, it immediately shows you a preview of the Markdown. But you can also choose to view the raw text content. So if you want to view it as a just plain text, you can click a button and it shows you that. But you can also edit directly in GitHub, and it opens an editor view that supports Markdown, and it's got some basic syntax highlighting in there. And you can make changes, like, for example, right now, I see that John left 4 line breaks in his app debuts, and I'm just going to commit these changes and done. So, like, it's a very quick, and look, when I'm not using Safari, typically I do this when I'm on my Mac, which is why I'm also excited to try out these Sonoma web app features. On the iPad and on the iPhone, I mostly use working copy, but there's no working copy on macOS. And I kind of dislike the GitHub desktop experience. I find the web version lighter, easier to use, and like the UI makes more sense to me. It supports drag and drop, so you can, for example, reveal when you're writing it. When I'm editing in Obsidian, I can just press a hotkey, and Obsidian on the Mac supports showing you the original file in the file system. So all I do is like, I don't recall the keyboard shortcut I have is like Command Shift E, and it reveals the document I'm editing in Finder, and from there I can just grab it, drop it into GitHub, commit my changes, and that's it. So like it's this very sort of integrated workflow that combined with the clean design of the web version, I kind of like it. I dig it. Even if like we use GitHub as non-programmers, but it works just as well for text and Markdown.
Right. No, that's a fascinating workflow. I never really thought to do it that way, but I can see why that makes a lot of sense to you. And I didn't actually realize that the drag and drop was supported like that with the web version. That's really good. I do use the GitHub web desktop app on the Mac, and it's an Electron app, and it's always, I guess it's the example that I usually give when people say all Electron apps are bad, that it's one of the better ones in that it's not like a really heavyweight app and it doesn't really seem to use a lot of system resources. But it is an app that has a lot more going on than I actually need. I just kind of have a path that I know that I need to use to work my way through it as, you know, I'm syncing up to our repo or looking at the history to see when you made your last changes and that kind of thing. All right. Why don't I talk a little bit of, I guess I should talk about some of the MacStories stuff that we use, because we do use a lot of web apps. And I guess the core of it still, for at least for the main website, is WordPress and the web app at WordPress, which I'm not really a fan of, to be honest, but it works, it's reliable, and I don't keep that in a separate web app. I just go to a tab, you know, put my documents in, save them, and then take a look at the preview before I hit publish. So WordPress is a big part of it. The custom backend that we have is Calliope that Alex has built, which is what we use for the club, and eventually we'll use for the main website too. And it works. It's not got the same bells and whistles as WordPress, but it's got exactly what we need, which I like a lot. And I find it much easier to navigate in. I mean, one of the things that probably the single feature that Alex put in Calliope that I appreciate the most is the ability for me to open any Club MacStories article on the web and go to a menu and say, edit this document. Because what that allows me to do is that if I'm working on something new and I forget what the special syntax might be for something that we don't do very often, I can find another article that does it, open it up in the editor, see how it works, and then copy that syntax over to a new document. That's something that's a lot harder to do in WordPress, because WordPress doesn't really, we can't go to the MacStories website and say, edit this in WordPress. We have to go into WordPress and search for that article. And it's just that extra step that I think makes it a little bit harder.
So the other web app that we use, it's custom made just for us, is the MacStories Images web app. And we've been using this for like 2 or 3 years at this point. And
yeah, at least 3.
It's been rock solid, and I love it because it's both a web app, like it's a custom mini site where we can go in and upload images, GIFs, videos, and for images and GIFs, there's a optimization like compression built in, and those images get compressed, they go directly to our CDN, and we get a MacStories URL in return. But there's also an API, so we convinced Alex to build an API for shortcuts, and so we can use the MacStories images. We can upload screenshots for example, from Apple Frames, right, from shortcuts directly to the MacStories images web app, and we still get a URL in return, which is excellent.
Yeah, and it feels like magic to me because I've put that app into a Safari web app too, and I can be sitting here on my phone taking screenshots and creating frames around them using Apple Frames. And if I choose upload when that's been generated, it just magically appears on my Mac like 2 or 3 seconds later. It's really amazing, and I love having that. All right, Federico, we already mentioned MailChimp, and that's something that I use every week to get our club newsletter out. But the other app that I use quite a bit is Grammarly. I've been using it now.
Yeah.
Do you? Okay. Yeah, I've been using it for 3 or 4 years. I've been kind of wondering if ChatGPT would replace it, but I don't think that ChatGPT is good enough yet to totally replace Grammarly. I find Grammarly frustrating because it wants to change my writing too much. I tend to just look at what is like their red category.
Yeah, that's what I do as well.
The things that it thinks are wrong, and it trips up and misses. I don't know. It wants to change things that aren't really mistakes. You have to be pretty judicious about it, but it's really good for catching things like, I don't know, double words or commas that are missing and stuff like that. It's really kind of a last pass cleanup type of thing for me when I do my writing.
Yeah, and if I recall correctly, Grammarly has this like app, like native apps that you can use, and I think they have like a keyboard, or they used to have a keyboard on the iPad at some point.
They do. They still have that. I don't use any of that. I just use the web
neither.
app.
It's just easier to grab a bunch of markdown text and paste it, like go to Safari, log in with your Grammarly account, paste the text, and it's going to find typos for you. And what you mentioned, like the red category, that's also what I do, because otherwise it tries to correct your form or style. And I don't want that. Like, I don't want my grammar checking tool to have an opinion. I just want it to find typos.
Yeah, once in a while, I'll look at the category where it says something's unclear. So I look at it once in a while to see if I'm being too wordy once in a while. But that's about it. I will say, if there's anybody on the Safari team listening, that this is the one web app that I haven't been able to get to work with the new Safari web app feature.
Oh,
because it's interesting. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with how Grammarly's site works, but it works initially. But then I come back maybe a day later to check a second story. And when I launch it, instead of opening the Grammarly website, it kicks me out immediately to Safari and opens a new tab with Grammarly in it. And the web app is just a blank window, a blank black window. So I really don't know what's going on there, but I've got that one still in a pinned tab as a result of that. And, but maybe that, it's still early in the beta season. Maybe that'll get fixed after a while.
Yeah. So it's like not setting the cookies properly or something.
Yeah, it's doing, because you can kick out to Safari proper, using the button. And there's probably, however that button works in the web app, functionality is probably getting triggered somehow by the loading of the page or something.
All right, so the next item I want to mention, so I kind of feel like maybe it's cheating to mention Google Docs, but I still use Google Docs on the web for my Relay FM shows. So Connected and Remaster, we still use Google Docs.
I don't know how you tolerate that. I cannot stand that app. I stay out of it as much as possible.
I don't like it, and it gets especially weird when it comes to like text sizes and colors.
Yes.
Sure.
Trying to copy things out into another document.
And sure, it's reliable. I'll give you that. Like, performance is excellent, and it's fast enough. I mean, it's not real time, but it's
close.
It's a decent approximation of that. And it's convenient if you have a Google account, right? I use it. I have a pin tab in Safari for my connected show notes document. That's what I do. Occasionally, I have used Notion in the browser. I don't anymore. I have the Notion. It's not really a native app on the Mac. It's more like a wrapper for the web app. Yeah. But I have it in my dock. But I have used it in the browser. And I used to, at some point, I had the Notion app in my dock logged into a Teamspace, and the Notion web app in the browser logged into a separate Teamspace, like to have two different profiles, which I guess is what you can do now with Safari profiles in Sonoma and iOS 17. But yeah, I mean, you can use Notion in the browser. It's a web app and it's good enough, but I don't do it anymore. And I guess the last one I will mention that I think you also have used in the browser, Raindrop, the bookmark manager. It also comes with native apps. In fact, on Apple platforms, I believe they're now made entirely in SwiftUI. But it's excellent in the browser. They have a web clipper that allows you to clip any web page you're browsing. They have an excellent extension for highlights, which works really well in Safari for Mac. It sort of retrieves your highlights from previously bookmarked web pages. Really well done. And you can manage your entire collection, your entire library of bookmarks, as well as create shared collections for other people. You can do it all from the browser, from a web app, which is why Raindrop is also quite popular among Windows users, because it's truly cross-platform, including, you can use it in Edge, Chrome, whatever, and it works totally fine.
Yeah, I've been a real Raindrop convert this year. I've really been using it a lot for the last 2 or 3 months, and the Mac app, there is a Mac app. It's not SwiftUI, and it's more of a web wrapper, and it's not great. I think I might try it in a dedicated web browser app because, I have used it on Safari too, and I generally don't like working in tabs in Safari. For me, like Safari is reading and research, and apps are for working, doing other kinds of work. But I think maybe Raindrop might be something that I would like in a separate browser app. But yeah, the Mac app isn't the greatest. I do like the iOS and iPadOS apps. I do miss, however, the fact that it doesn't have any kind of shortcut support, which is a real shame.
The very last web app I will mention that I was almost forgetting about, I still use Zapier on the web. And I've tried all these I actually signed up and paid for these other web automation tools. I was paying for IFTTT Premium until a few months ago. I signed up and paid for a couple of months with Mate.com. And I gotta tell you, Zapier is the only UI that makes sense for me. It's it's that top to bottom.
It's easier.
It's easier. It's pricey. It's very expensive. But we got a few things going on there for Mastodon, for the club, for Trello, and it's very reliable. It runs every few minutes, and the UI makes a lot of sense to me, like the top to bottom sort of shortcuts like style, and the way variables work, and the way data collection works. It just makes sense to me, and they don't have native apps at all, so you just got to use it from a browser. And I think throughout the course of the multiple redesigns they've done over the years, I really like even what they do from a visual standpoint. It's really nice looking, and the performance is great. And so yeah, I pay for it, and I like it.
Yeah, it's really great. I do not pay for it. I do have like 1 or 2 zaps that I do, but I've never really gotten that into it. I try to avoid that if I can, I guess. But none of that stuff has ever stuck for me, whether it's the IFTTT or any of the other ones. But yeah, maybe I'll get more into it down the road. All right, Federico, I think that's it for this week's episode of App Stories. I want to thank our sponsor again. That was ZocDoc. You can find the two of us over at macstories.net. We are both on Mastodon. Just go to vitici.macstories.net or johnvorhees.macstories.net, or both. You can follow both of us by going to those websites and clicking the follow button. We're also on Instagram and now Threads. Federico is at Vitici. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.